If I had a dollar for every time someone has asked me in one of these conversations about, what's the next suburb or, which suburbs are good, and the question makes entire sense because obviously when people think about houses, on property, one of the early things that they think about is, okay, where is this property? Is is in Melbourne, is in Sydney, is in some regional town somewhere, and they obviously want the certainty and the mental image of where these properties will be. However, the biggest challenge with focusing on town first is that it doesn't take into account the individuality of each of the properties in the portfolio, but also the requirements that each investor ultimately needs to address in the strategy. So we follow an approach called strategy first, which is before we look at any suburb, and I'll give you an example. At the moment, we're probably looking about 20 or 30 different areas across Victoria, both where we are already operating, but also where where we're looking at expanding our portfolio and establishing new properties, or we have properties under construction already. Before we look at any of those areas, and definitely before we make a call of which area is the right area for you, we have a conversation about to try to understand, your short-term plans, your long-term plans, what is it that we're trying to achieve, but also what resources do you have to ultimately put into this project. There's no point in me recommending the best suburb to put a rooming house if that's above the price point where an investor can actually acquire a property. At the same time, the opposite is true. So there are plenty of areas in Victoria with very, very affordable land, but if you have a lot more money, then maybe those areas are not the areas with the best return. So we follow an approach which is we recommend people do the project that they can do, and within the constraint of the projects they can do based on resources and goals, then select the property that will provide the best result for the long-term goal. Now, what I can do though is I can give you some kind of broad frame of reference so that way I don't leave your mind and your head with a completely unanswered question that doesn't help. So most investors who invest in this type of property, depending on the area and depending on the cost of land and the size of the property, tend to put into this project somewhere between $200,000 and $400,000 in cash or equity. That tends to be roughly the contribution. Obviously, on the lower end of that range, we're talking about smaller properties, probably 5 or 6 studios, and in areas where land is more affordable, maybe in regional Victoria and things like that. On the higher end of that range, well, obviously you get a bunch more options. And this is truly a case where economies of scale largely play a role in this project. So even though a lot of our clients start with some of the smaller properties and maybe in kind of smaller locations, inevitably they tend to drift to some of the kind of bigger properties that provide a better return.